I've actually used at least 2 or 3 of those lines myself. So it's pretty funny. It's pretty funny how how deeply we get into it, and and how we go about expressing themselves. And it's a strange thing for me to be here at this bloggers conference because I am probably, yes, this is rather depressing, I am the oldest person in this room.
No, you're not.
Yeah, I'm afraid I am. I took the Ramones bowling. That is not a joke. I put on once a concert in London where I put on, actually a concert in Boston before that, where I put on REM as the opening band for The Beat. 1983, yes. People are shaking their heads like, no, it can't be true. Yes, it is true. But I can easily remember a day when the worst thing that you could possibly be was somebody who talked about themselves all the time. It was a long time until at Brooklyn Brewery we finally got around to the point where we were comfortable doing social media. Because our whole idea was, frankly, we were older than a lot of the other people out there. Were like, well, a gentleman doesn't make a party around a new beer release. We just release the beer quietly. And we came to find out that, well, if you don't tell people what you're doing, guess what? They're not going to know. So it's been an interesting evolution for us to kind of learn about these things. And obviously we've been involved in a bunch of things that include media, over the years, books and whatever else. But the world of blogs is, in a way, a brand new world for us, even after all these years. But I did grow up in a different time when, and a lot of you didn't grow up quite in the same space. But maybe you went there, maybe you went to the United States, in the older days, maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And basically, I grew up in the Matrix. I'm sure you've seen the movie, Something's Wrong. An overlay over your reality, you don't know quite what it is, what the problem is. You go to the supermarket and you feel uneasy. And the reason why you felt uneasy in the supermarket was actually pretty simple. The stuff on the shelves that was labeled as food was not food. Now, I know that some of you grew up with this sort of stuff. Supermarket white bread. Yours wasn't all that different from ours. And you get this stuff, and it supposedly stayed fresh in a bag for 2 weeks. Okay, who here has ever made a loaf of bread at home? Right? How long does a loaf of bread stay fresh? A day?
3 days.
Maybe 2 days? 3 days. That's pretty good bread. My point is, a loaf of bread does not stay fresh in a bag for 2 weeks. And if you looked at this so-called bread, our main brand was called Wonder Bread, but there were many of them. You read, you read the side panel, and it had 40 ingredients printed in a big blue panel on the side of the bag. 40. Now, bread has 4 or 5 ingredients, each of which can be pronounced by a 5-year-old child. I always wondered when I was a kid, why was the so-called crust not crusty? And then I found out that it wasn't actually ever even an oven. It was sprayed on food coloring. The thing was not baked but steamed. And so the stuff that said it was bread was not bread. And I wondered, how did we get to the point where we were willing to call this thing bread even though we knew in our hearts that it wasn't true? You can't roll bread into a marble and flick it across the room. It's all perfect, perfectly the same size holes throughout. Now here's the thing, that stuff, you can't make that at home. I don't care how good a baker you are, you can't do it. What it is food technology. It is a food facsimile. And that's kind of what we had, not just for bread, but for so many things. We had food facsimiles, things that we called food but weren't food. And we had the same thing for beer. Now, we had essentially one kind of beer. And you had the bad stuff and the good stuff. And the good stuff wasn't good, but the bad stuff was really, really bad. Hoffenreffer, also known as the Green Death. Basically one pint and you wake up the next morning with a spike through your forehead. And I have to tell you the truth, we like to make fun of the big brewers. We bought Budweiser when we had money. Like, when I was a student, we never had any money. We were poor. But when we had money, we bought Budweiser because at least it tasted like water. the other stuff that we had tasted much, much worse than water. And I've come to respect the ability, though I don't want to do it myself, the ability to do what those guys were doing, because I know what the other stuff tasted like. And then I moved to London in 1983, and I was stage managing rock bands. I ran the University of London Union, we put on a lot of cool stuff. But on the side, I was going to the pub. And in the pub, I discovered this stuff called beer. And I had my first pint of cask beer. It may not have been very good for what I would think of now, but I got this thing and it looked like a fishbowl. It was so large, and it was a strange color, kind of brownish. And it was flat by my experience. I'm drinking it, and it's like, wow, I'm getting waves crashing against the beach. And I've got fruit, all kinds of fruit. I think I get mangoes, whatever else. And then it's gone. I'm like, I'm not sure I like that. I'll have another and find out. So I got another one, and that starts this long road, towards standing up here. And eventually I became a home brewer when I got back to the United States after a year. And it turned out that I said, I went and I said, okay, I like some beer. And I like Bud Light, Miller Lite, Coors Light. And you're like, oh no. I realized I've been to Belgium, I've been to Germany, I've been all over Europe, spent a year in the UK, and I was ruined. Now this was 1984. There was nothing. It's very hard for many of you to imagine nothing, like zero. Well, wasn't there like some Sam? No, there was no Sam Adams. There was nothing. Zero. In 1990, Sierra Nevada came out to New York, and they asked us could they put their beer on our trucks so that they could sell it, because nobody was willing to carry Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. Stuff tastes funny. Looks funny too. Why don't you get out of here? And that's the way it was. And eventually we sold about 200 different brands of beer that were not our own beers. Just because, but people wouldn't take Chimay. People wouldn't take Duvel. So, it's been fascinating. And part of what I want to look at is like how do we go from a country like that to where we are now? I started brewing professionally in 1989 after, basically beer had taken over my life. I went to work for a guy named Mark Whitty, and Mark had been a senior brewer for Samuel Smith's. He opened up Manhattan Brewing Company November 9th of 1984 in Manhattan, massive brew pub specializing in beers on the hand pump. And I went to work for him in 1989. So, in a part of my heart, I am in fact a Yorkshire brewer. I still remember strange Yorkshire, locutions. I'll never forget one morning, and this is how I finally learned to translate things. Garrett, what? The kettle wants water putting in. The kettle wants water putting in. In American English, there is nothing about that sentence that makes the slightest bit of sense. The kettle being an inanimate object can't want anything, and the structure is German. So, it's kind of the way, that I grew up. I think that one thing that we want to look at, as we look at getting beer out there in public, is the fact that beer is not, at the end of the day, a liquid. Yes, I do make a liquid, we process a liquid, we ferment a liquid, we put a liquid in the bottle, but that's not what beer is. And I really realized this particularly one day when I was at Young's. I was visiting with the brewers there when Young's was in London. And they had an old room, and this old room was way up in the rafters. It had the old kettles. And the kettle's been used until, say, 1984 or so. Maybe this was 1994 or early 90s anyway. And they were old, dusty, pretty huge, about 15 feet tall, bullet-shaped. And there were two of them. They had huge riveted, round, copper lids that were on chains with weights on the other side to open them up. They were put in the 1800s, and they'd just been retired. And they said, well, one of these days we'll do something with them, we'll clean them up, maybe make them into a display room. And Derek Prentice, who was the brewer there at the time, got a phone call. He said, I'll be right back. And he left me alone in this room, pigeon flapping, through the corner, kind of dark, with these two kettles. And the thing was, I'm looking at them, And I'm standing there in this room by myself, and I became scared. I'm not somebody who's scared in the dark. I'm looking at these two things, and they looked to me like talismans. They looked kind of like gods. You know, I suddenly said, you know, how many people's lives have, in a way, run through these two kettles? You know, out of these kettles have come love and friendship, maybe wars, marriages, murder. Life itself has flowed through these kettles for 100 years. You know, so then what is this thing that we do? You know, if it isn't that. You know, it's not a liquid. Beer is actually people. You know, and it's a thing, the funny thing about that video is that the fact that beer is people is something that we sometimes tend to forget. You know, I hope that somebody, there'll be part of me that will actually be happy if you find out this isn't true. Somebody told me this a couple of years ago, that, you know, Brooklyn Brewery, we invented collaborations. The idea of collaborative brewing. The first one that we did was with Breakspear at the old brewery in Henley-on-Thames in 1997. We followed that very quickly with, you know, dozens of others. Maybe the most famous of them being the one with Schneider in Germany, which wasn't until 2007. And it's fascinating to watch that happen now. And I think that that really brings into focus the fact that beer, you know, is at the end of the day actually about people. What other industry, if you want to use that word, will you find competitors working together for fun? You know, I think it was San Pelagione from Dogfish Head that said at one point that, you don't see Coke collaborating with Pepsi. You know, not really going to happen. And I think also the fact that if something goes wrong in your brewery, a pump breaks, a seal goes out, whatever else, the guy down the road, quite possibly your closest competitor, is probably the only one who can or will help you. And they will likely drop everything to make sure that you get what you need. The thing that we do, you know, is really, really special. Now, recently I had, you know, a few excellent opportunities. And I guess I want to explain a little bit about, you know, what it is that, that beer is about for me, because for me it goes back to being able to create something that that I can't always create at home when it comes to collaborations. And this is maybe one of my favorites. I went down to Brazil. I met these guys about 7 or 8 years ago. It was a small brewery called Vals, W-A-L-S, and the A has an umlaut, so it's kind of like Vals. You know, young family, you know, two guys, their mother and father, and a family brewery. You see that a lot, you know, in Brazil, which has its own great brewing history. And I wanted to brew a beer that was based on sugarcane. I love the flavors of sugarcane, the flavors of cachaça, of real rums. They're really funky and fascinating. And I'm not talking about P2 and stuff like that. I'm talking about really serious cachaça. And so I said to the guys, and this is what I love, I'm like, okay, you want to do a collaboration? We need to do this. We need a bunch of guys and a lot of machetes. I'm going to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to cut down 700 kilos of sugarcane, and I'm going to bring it back to the brewery, and now here you need to get the crusher, a sugarcane crusher that needs to be able to crush 700 kilos of sugarcane in at least a couple of hours, not too slow. And we're going to put that into the kettle, and it's going to be 15% of this beer that we're going to make. And they were like, cool. You know, and they got everything, the pickup trucks, you know, the bunches of guys who were all like, you know, beer fans or whatever else, the machetes, which I still have one now at home, a crusher at the brewery, and we made a beer called Saison de Caipira. This was back in November. I learned how to shuck sugarcane, which is actually extremely difficult. Not something you want to try at home. And it was really an amazing thing to see. And the beer has, you know, has that funk to it, and it has a feeling of place. And, you know, I really love having had the opportunity not only to make something new and express an area, but also the parties these guys threw. You know, the Brazilians' parties, they don't look like our parties. we think that we have a great time, and I always say that the beer people have a lot more fun than the wine people. The cocktail people are crazy. I mean, their parties start at 2 o'clock in the morning, But then the Brazilian parties are, the coolest that you could ever imagine. You have a room full of people, 95 or 100 people. I'm the speaker, whatever else, and I go to shake people's hands at the end. No. You have to kiss all the women and hug all the guys. You have a band playing, everybody's dancing for the whole thing. This is a beer dinner, kind of awesome. Make your way down to Brazil. So I had an interesting experience, I guess it was last year. I was talking to guys, it was probably from Beer Advocate, and we were talking about beer ratings. And they said, well, you must, pay attention to, the ratings, about your beers. This beer of yours has an A, and this one has a B minus, and this, and I said, I don't know. And they said, well, what do you mean you don't know? I said, I don't know. It's like, we don't look at that stuff. He said, don't you want to know what your customers think of your beer? I said, no. Like, why would I want to know the ratings, of a beer from the public? So here's the thing I want to put out there as some food for thought. I find it fascinating, and I'm not pointing a finger at anybody here because I don't know whether any of you have ratings, in your blogs, but it's certainly part of the culture out there. There are many people who want the brewer today to be an artist and to listen to you at the same time. And one thing I want people to realize is one of the definitions of an artist is a person who is not listening to you. The artist, as a brewer, is supposed to be going and trying to make something that's hopefully beautiful, that they like. So I remember there was a young brewer who had started off, and he was brewing some really beautiful beers in the United States, and he started getting a lot of people, online kind of hating on the fact that his beers were really relatively gentle and balanced, and they were saying, I'm trying to do something subtle and interesting and whatever else, and my ratings, aren't really what I would like them to be. And I said, well, why are you looking at the ratings? Say, there's one of two possibilities. You could go to the ratings. Why are you looking at ratings? And I'll tell you why. Reason number one, you hope for flattery. Everybody hopes for flattery. I am entirely susceptible to flattery. Everybody wants people to say nice things about them. They're going to make them feel good. But that's not going to have any influence on your beer. Or two, somebody will say something bad about your beer, which will make you feel bad. Now, here's the question. If somebody says something negative about your beer, are you going to change it? If the answer is yes, you should probably go home and become a banker. If the answer is no, then why are you reading the ratings? Well, because you hoped for flattery. It's like, stop hoping for flattery, and go do the thing that you came to do. It's interesting. And I'm not putting, any of us, myself certainly included, in this range, but you can imagine, even if you don't like Bob Dylan, could you imagine if you found out that Bob Dylan had focus grouped all of his albums? He had got a bunch of people in a room, and he said, okay, I got 60 songs here, and I want you guys to tell me which ones you like best. And those are the ones who, can you imagine how crushed you would be to find out that Bob Dylan had focus grouped his albums? You'd be like, man, I thought that guy was a musician. I thought he was an artist. Focus groups, that's terrible. Same people would like us to read reviews and know the ratings of our beers. It fascinates me. So, look, have I done it? Of course I've done it. I've been reviewing beers for All About Beer magazine since 1994. I write reviews. I don't post reviews, online because I think it's kind of not fair. I sit in a strange seat as a brewer, and as a reviewer in that situation. And I think that people know by now, having read my reviews, that when I sit down to do those reviews, I take off the Brooklyn Brewery hat and I put on the reviewer's hat, and I give it to them straight. But if I start writing reviews at 2 o'clock in the morning after an interesting evening, I might not be able to hold that together. So I have a different standard that I'm trying to go for. So it's like what I tell younger brewers is it's like glory, ratings. A brewer craves not these days. Puffery, constant puffery. The other thing I've learned, over time, and this fascinates me as well, is that, and again, this video kind of goes back to that, is the way that we have a tendency to be talking to each other, and not so much necessarily to other people. We say we want people to bring people in, but we don't always make it all that inviting. People standing around talking about IBUs. It's like, oh, that beer's got I think it's got 80 IBUs, 50 IBUs, 100 IBUs. When I was working on the Brewmaster's Table, one of the things that really fascinated me was when I talked to ordinary people about beer, people would say things to me like, I don't know what IBUs are, but they sound disgusting. Somebody else said to me, like, she said, well, I don't know, but, this craft beer, it sounds like a chemistry experiment. People always have these numbers. It's got 14.5, and it's got 100, and it's got this, and it's got that. I said, wow, the wine guy goes out there, and he's like, look at the rolling, beautiful hillsides. Look at the, beautiful, happy families who are making the wine, and they're doing this, and they're doing that. And we would get up there with a little, propeller going around on the bean cap saying, my beer has 75 IBUs and it's got an OG of 75. And you just watch people tune out. It didn't sound delicious. We were trying to do something that tastes delicious. And when we talked about it, it didn't sound delicious. Brewers are only now starting to learn to go from being scientifically minded geeks to being people who can actually talk to other people about flavor and who they are and what they do. And it's a tough journey because you have that switch on all day and you have to learn how to turn it off. And then sometimes we'll be talking to you guys and we have to kind of figure out, well, we speak the same language, and so we'll default into that same language, but this stuff is going to go out there in front of normal people at some point. Now, you might say that your blog is only going to be read, by kindred spirits. You know what? I kind of hope not. I hope that what we're trying to do is actually spread what it is that we like, because we're enjoying it, and because we think other people would enjoy it too. And that's why Brewmaster's Table is written in very plain English, with some flowery stuff that sounded exactly like that. A Christmas tree full of mangoes. No, I think I'm going to bring out a beer called Long Toasty Thing. I think I'm just going to have to do that. But yeah, almost nothing about it in that book about IBUs. I explain at the beginning of the book what they are, and then you never hear from them again. Because they're, actually pretty irrelevant. I remember talking to the quality control manager for Guinness, and this was maybe 12 years ago or so. And I asked her, what are the IBUs in draft Guinness? And she said, and this was at the time, I don't know what it is now, she said 35 to 45. At 35 to 45, that's a pretty big swing. And what she said was, well, in all our testing, what we find is that the bitterness perception of Guinness has little to do with the IBUs and has everything to do with the roast. So we work hard on controlling the flavor of the roast, and we let the IBUs go where they want to. Kind of interesting. Now I know that, as a brewer, you have to take bitterness of roast very much into account. It's part of what gives you the bitterness in the beer. But it's interesting to see that a major corporation like that, with beer all over the world, 35 to 45, a 30% swing, doesn't even matter. And yet, this is something that we're putting out in front of people. And on that topic, I just want to leave you with an idea. Can you imagine? Now, do remember that even though we're doing great compared to a lot of people, the wine people still own the general media. There are wine columns in every single newspaper and magazine in your country and my country. So, will the wine people, will you ever see an acidity number on a bottle of wine, ever? A tannin number? These are real numbers. You can be sure the winemaker knows how much tannin is in the wine, and he's paying very close attention to it. They would never, ever, ever tell you what that number is. You know why? Because it doesn't sound delicious. So I'm not saying that you guys have an obligation, by any means, to speak in a language that talks to people about deliciousness. But I think that sometimes you need to call us on it when we're talking to you like aliens. And I know you're an alien too, so you can understand what we're saying. But I think it's important to be able to get that stuff out there. But we often do think that we're talking, to each other. And it used to be that in my mind, and I'm kind of ashamed to say this, but it's true, I had an idea of what a craft beer drinker probably looked like, and where they probably came from, and how old they probably were. And, when I went and did kind of a big public tasting, like for a cooking school, I'd say, okay, well, maybe they can handle this and that, but I'm not gonna do the Schlenkerla. This is Beer 101. We'll start here. We want to scare anybody because we have a really wide range of people, and they would come in. A lot of times it'd be mostly women, maybe 55, 60% women. Starting with people in their 20s all the way to people in their 80s. And it was only about 6 or 7 years ago, after about 900 dinners and tastings, that I finally realized that this idea that I'd had about what the craft beer fan looked like and how old they were and what gender they were, whatever else, was not only false, it was patently ridiculous. At the end of, people come in and say, oh, my friends dragged me, here. I didn't really want to come, but, we thought it would be a lark, and my friend over here is a beer fan, so whatever else. And, I drink Coors Light when I have to drink any beer at all. There's nothing else to drink. And at the end, she'll be like, well, I don't like beer, but where can I get this one, this one, this one, and this one? And you're like, okay, wait a minute. It took me 20 years to do that, and you did it in an hour and a half. Just went from there, yep, I'm all the way there. I'm gonna get that double IPA, I'm buying some tomorrow. You're like, damn, really? Or you meet the old guy who's he's 82 years old, and he says, this beer reminds me of when I was stationed in Belgium during World War II. And we were drinking all these beers, man, I haven't had a beer like this in a long time, that's awesome. And you're like, but dude, you're old. Now there'd be somebody else sitting there looking at me saying, well, he's not going to order a craft beer, after all, he's black. I mean, it's funny, we're looking at people, and I was still surprised. Even a couple of months ago, I was in Hong Kong, and I'm at a little Belgian bar, and it's like, oh, well, this place is just packed because the rugby sevens are on. And then you go back there after the rugby sevens are gone, and the place is completely packed with Chinese people drinking Rochefort. And you're like, wow, Chinese people are drinking Rochefort. And you're like, oh man, I've done it again. Why did I ever think that anybody was any different? We start trading stories that we have about grandmothers who love, black chocolate stout is the typical of grandmothers apparently across the United States. 11% imperial stout is like, well, this is my favorite. And you're like, really? Let's see, an 11%, 10.5%, yes, 50, 60 IBU, imperial stout, black and bitter, this is the one you want. She's like, yes. And did it ever occur to me that, yeah, she is older. Maybe she's smarter than I am. Maybe she's been around for another 30 or 40 years. Maybe she's seen a lot of things. Maybe she has really good taste. What she can handle. But if you talk down to people, you're never going to find out, and neither will they. And that's an important lesson, that I take into myself is, we always need, never to talk down to anybody. We might need to give them a little bit of information, but these days, even if it's a big public tasting, I'll tell you what's coming, and you might not like it, but here it comes. and I will serve anything that I think is nice on that day. I don't care how sour it is, how funky it is, or whatever else. It's like, well, this is your one chance to taste this. You might never get this chance again. No one might put this in front of you in the future, so today you're going to drink it. You might not like it, but you're going to taste it. And I think it's important that we do that. I want to leave you with an idea about beer, and about what beer is, and about, beer people, because it's something that I don't see as much as I'd like to these days, that Michael Jackson the great beer writer, used to really, write about. And that was sort of what the evolution is, of the person who actually does the beer. Because we were talking yesterday about, what craft beer is. And we have a feeling in the United States that we know what craft beer is, or at least, it's kind of like that definition of pornography. It's like, I know it when I see it. Here, people talk about craft beer, and I'll tell you, I still don't know what it is here. We were talking yesterday, it's like, well, what if, Name the Brewery, who aren't all that large and owned by a family, whatever else, have always made really nice beer. Suppose they started to use Simcoe. Would they be a craft brewer then? Trying to find where that line is. I think what's more interesting, in a way, is to figure out, how did this person evolve into this? Because to me, the difference between a craft brewery and other breweries really is relatively simple, or you can distill it down to, is there a personal vision, somewhere in what's going on? Sierra Nevada Brewing Company is more than 5 times the size of Brooklyn Brewery. If you go and you meet Ken Grossman, you know that there is a personal vision of everything that happens in the brewery. The guy is a scary genius. He knows everything about every square inch of that place. He engineered a lot of the things himself. He and Vinny Zaluzzo would get together and he's showing me on an iPhone. Like, we made a machine that puts a dose of Brett individually into each bottle, so like we don't have to have the Brett like over here in the brewery, and it's like, and the things like, and they built it. And then some people will tell me, Ken Grossman's doing 1 million barrels a year. That's not a craft brewery. I'm like, fuck you. Pardon the French. But I'm like, really? Because I don't think you understand what that word means if that's not a craft brewery. It really does come down to, a personal vision of where people are coming from. And you can go to, name your favorite big brewer, go into a room with all their distributors and all their importers, and ask, can anybody raise their hand, who is brewmaster of this company? We're all here, 300 of you, 400 of you, 500 of you, you sell $1 billion worth of this beer, who's brewmaster? Anybody? 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 No, nobody. Brewmaster's name is money. That's the name of their brewmaster. That's the difference. And it's really, at the end of the day, probably all you really need to know. Is this someone's vision? I think that it's important to realize, especially when you meet small brewers, that people didn't intend to be here. They got, it's a guy like, oh, he's got a doctorate. People do have doctorates, and they have law degrees, and, they thought they were going to be filmmakers. They thought they were going to do something else, and that it would make money, hopefully, and that, they'd be able to bring up a family on it, whatever else. And then this thing happened to them, and they fell off the rails. Now, hopefully, happily, and the beer can come up out of the ice. And I'll take that bucket up here when you're ready. And this thing happened to them, and they went in a different direction. That is what has made craft beer. That is the difference between brewing in the United States and in Italy and in Denmark, and in Scotland than it is up until now in Germany. Nobody here got to be 16 or 17 and said, let's see, what can I do with my food engineering degree? I'm going to make toothpaste, I could go to Coca-Cola, I could do pharmaceuticals, or brewing seems like it might be, interesting. No, they fell in love with beer first, and then were diverted from a path that in the United States they probably paid a lot of money for. You got a degree in something. Guess what? Probably wasn't brewing. You thought you were going to do something else, and you left it as a labor of love. When you taste somebody's beer and you talk about it, and we should all say, and I certainly do, whatever we want, but don't ever forget that that is an actual business that has to put the shoes on their kids' feet. When somebody goes and they make a sour, when you see a place like Cigar City that starts up a brewery in Tampa, Florida, puts their money, all their mom's money, all their dad's money, all their friends' money into this thing, and starts coming out with crazy beers that there is no real evidence. Do not point this beer at anybody you like. Do treat it like champagne. Keep your, keep your thumb over it for a second, and take the cork out gently, and you will have hopefully no difficulties. Somebody doesn't follow instructions. Somebody's cut off over here. When you think of what it takes, to do that, you're going to take every chance. And I'll tell you, if you want to ask people, what is going to be the most popular, the answer is very simple. We already know the answer. You want to know the ratings? We already know the answer to the question. The answer at the end of the day is Wonder Bread. The answer is industrial beer. That is what you can sell the largest amount of to the largest number of people. That's not the question that we're asking. It's not the answer, that we're interested in. So when you see somebody start a brewery or they do something, they might do something beautiful and they might do something that's not so beautiful. I think that you always need to take into account whether or not they really mean it. I think that the hard thing, as the world of brewing, the world of blogging, everything, becomes so much more intense. You can't put out a beer these days, without people knowing about it. Is that the pressure always is to try to play a little bit safer, in some ways. You need to sell this stuff, everyone's going to be writing about it, everybody's going to notice it. And I think that, I can't remember who said it, but I know that somebody said it, at some point, that, to be an artist of some sort, you try to become a little bit more yourself every day. And at Brooklyn Brewery, what I feel like we're doing, to some extent, is to try to become, over time, the brewery that we always said we were. Because, everybody's fronting. Everybody's fronting. Everybody does the peacock display. You come out there, and before you really got anything, the feathers come out like this, and you put on a show. But you haven't got it yet. You haven't got it yet. Not 5 years in, not 10 years in, let me tell you, not 15 years in. Only now, after 20 some odd years, am I getting anywhere near being the brewer that I wanted to be and that I've said I was. And I think that's true of everybody. And everybody should always be becoming, what it is that they want to be. And the obligation then of the brewer, is to, go out there and to brew the truth. It might not be my truth, but if it's your truth, find out what that is. People come ask me, like, what should I do? And I say, well, whatever it is you think that you can do better than anybody else, then go do that. And try to the extent that you can to set aside everything else. Whatever it is that made you get into brewing, you may not be able to do that thing every day from the beginning. But every day that you don't work in the direction of doing the thing you came to do is a day that you're going in the opposite direction. And one day you wake up and you look yourself in the mirror and you won't recognize yourself anymore. That thing that you decided to do, that's your God. You go serve that God, every day. And what we're trying to do, when people come to visit the brewery, and I think this scares them, because it sounds like psychological gobbledygook. But I tell them, I said, look, the purpose of the brewery is to make us happy. That's the purpose of the brewery. It has three purposes, really. You know, we try to make great beer for our customers. We try to return a value to shareholders, and the brewery should make us happy. The thing is, if the brewery isn't making money, and we're a failing company, we won't be happy. And we're proud people, so if we're not making good beer, we won't be happy. The only purpose of the brewery is to make us happy. You know, if you're going and you're making something that you don't believe in, then you're doing everything wrong, you know, and for all the wrong reasons. So, you know, I'm glad for the fact that I think we've become a much more artisanal brewery over the last several years than we ever were before. We make about 20 some odd different beers a year, about 28 to 30 different beers a year. Some of them you can get, and some of them you can't get. We have a whole range of beers we call ghost bottles. You know, because it used to be you could slide something under the door, you know, or in a back door to your friend and he gets some. But these days, you know, you try that and you get the phone call from Tony from Tony's Sports Bar. And then the phone rings and it's like, you know, hey Tony, how's it going? It's like, well, you know what, Garrett, I was good. I was good this morning, but now I'm not so good. It's like, what's wrong, Tony? Like, I've been reading blogs. It's like, oh man, Tony, don't read blogs. You know, I heard you got this new beer that's been aged for like 5 years in bourbon barrels and got re-fermented in the bottle with bread. It's like, you know what bread is? It's like, yeah, of course I know what bread is. I read blogs. It's like, well, Tony, you know, we only, it's like, I need 12 cases of that down here, right here today. It's like, well, Tony, we only made 50 cases. And besides, we're a sports bar. You got 15 screens. Oh, now you're telling me who I am? Now you're telling me who I am. Do you know who I am? I'm the guy who sold 500 kegs of Brooklyn Lager last year. That's who I am. And now you don't know me? How about this? Maybe I don't know you. How would that be? Maybe you want to come down here and pick up all your stuff and I never see you again. How would that be? I want that stuff down here. You're like, oh my God. People are crazy. They're crazy. And it's all your fault. But it's a beautiful thing. I want to end here with a little toast. Now, of course, I never have actually used this microphone. I'm from Brooklyn, and therefore quite loud. Easy enough to hear me. And yes, I do get annoyed when people call this a champagne bottle. I want everybody to realize and remember, this is a beer bottle. And this was always a beer bottle, and champagne is in a beer bottle. The whole point of champagne was to make a thin, undrinkable wine from northern France that didn't have enough fruit, and put it, you know, and make it sparkling like beer so that people could drink it. And they took the technique, the bottle, the wire cage, the cork, everything. The only thing they added was the Ridley and Reine-Mouage and dégorgement so they could remove the yeast. The reason why? No, not to make the wine clear so that you could put sugar in it. Because almost every champagne that you'll ever see, 99.7%, is basically a cocktail with sugar added. Now, I have to admit, I love good champagne. But not as much as this. You know, this is Sriracha Ace. It's one of many beers that we make 100% re-fermented in the bottle. It's a Saison at 7.5%. Large amount of Sriracha Ace hops. I guess I don't have to tell you, what they taste like. Here they really express themselves as kind of lemon peel and dill, which I really like. And so, I just want to give a toast, particularly to the brewers of Scotland. I'm amazed to see what's going on here, in the UK in the last 2 years or so. I used to come to England and frankly and to Scotland. I complain, like, well, the beers are great, but kind of the same every year. Nothing ever seems to change, And suddenly, a couple of years ago, like, boom, all this stuff happens. And, I hope that everybody's having fun. Of course, on a day-to-day basis, if you see it, I do hope that you'll drink some of our beer. But here's the thing, and I say this truly, wherever you are, you want to encourage people, their first beer they go out in the evening, they should try to make it a local beer, from wherever they're from. You might only stay for one, maybe you'll have three. If I could have the second or third one, I wouldn't mind. But your first beer of the evening, should be a local beer. Wherever you go, wherever you're from. And I hope you encourage people that you write for to do that. Because whoever that brewer is who went out there and put a second mortgage on the house and took a big chance, that person is the one who really needs you. They need you. If you think somebody's doing good work, just because you see them every day, if they're around the corner, some people will say, oh, well, you can get that everywhere. Well, yeah, hopefully you can get it everywhere if it's local and it's good. That's the way it's supposed to be. So support local brewers everywhere. Defend beer. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you guys for having me. And enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
I can start drinking.